Rev up your engines! Well, I just read an article. Green energy is neither green nor energy, and the guy has some pretty good points. The reason he says it's not energy, because it's not consistent. Wind power only works when the wind's blowing, and if the wind blows too much, they got to shut them down. So, it's a double-edged sword there. Solar panels only work what? When the sun's shining. Half the day it doesn't work. The sun's on the other side of the planet. And even on regular days, when it's cloudier, they don't work as well, right? So they're not a consistent supply of energy. I laughed my butt off the other day when I was reading an article about California saying they're going to have to buy energy from all other states and stuff because this summer it's going to be hot and they're going to have a shortage of air conditioning, so they got to buy their power. Yeah, they're going green there, but the green doesn't work, so they got to get the power from somewhere else. And until they come up with gigantic storage systems like, Tesla sells storage systems for giant electric batteries to store the power from electric solar and electric wind so they can store it so when there isn't wind and sun, you can keep it. But if you've seen, a lot of those things have blown up and started on fire. So they still got a long way to go before that's out and built, right? It's not consistent energy. We need consistent energy. They keep poo-pooing hydroelectric. They've shut dams down in places, tore the dams down. Perfectly clean way to make electricity, right? And of course, for actual super amounts of power, nuclear power, which makes the most sense. The Canadians use it in Ontario. It makes sense to do that. But no, they got this green, the wind's blowing, solar panels, load of baloney. These nuke plants are totally safe. Ask any of the modern scientists. They've got newer designs, but they're all on this wind and solar garbage, which is total nonsense. They need to get in something that's real. And, of course, green energy, not even really being real energy because it's not consistent, it's there all the time. It's not all that green. You find out all the pollution that's made doing it. And get this, if you got the world energy from solar panels, get this. The world uses 165,000 terawatts of energy every year, which requires 19 billion kilowatts of power on average. Solar projects is 10 watts per square meter. So you'd need 1.8 million square kilometers of solar projects to power the world. Is the space taken up by all the cities, towns, villages, and human infrastructure combined on the entire planet? So everywhere where people live, it takes up more space than that if you're going to use solar panels. So let's face the fact. It's absurd and it's not going to happen. The Fields 58 says, should I buy this 95 Corolla? It's got 57,000 miles, bought new by an old lady. 95 Corollas. 57,000 miles. Now, most of the time I won't believe it, but if it's an old lady, I'd believe it. My mother didn't put much mileage on her old Corolla either. Hers was a 2007 Corolla. The only problem is it's old, right? It's really old. That's old. You'd want to pull the wheels off, see if any of the brake systems are leaking. Everything that has rubber on it. Check the hoses, check the radiator, check the fan belts, make sure the engine and transmission oil isn't leaking because those have rubber seals and they can leak. But, with that mileage, it should be a great car. It's just you're going to have to watch it the first few months you own it to see if any of the rubber seals are going to go or anything's going to leak out. But mechanically, it'll be amazing shape because it won't be worn out at all. So don't pay much for it because it's so old. It doesn't matter. It's got 57,000 miles. A car that's pushing 30 years old isn't worth that much money on the open market. Ozzy Ramirez says, I got an evap gross leak on my 2005 Mazda 3. I changed the purge valve, evap canister, and fuel detection pump from a junkyard. Changed the gas cap. Didn't make any difference. You got a gross leak. Now, your first problem was you got an 05 Mazda, right? So that is what? 19 years old. And you bought junkyard parts for a 19-year-old car. Those parts could be bad, right? But you do have a gross leak. It says gross leak. The code you have is P0455 for a gross means a big leak. Hook up a smoke machine. You'll find where the leaks are. All those cars have a little tap. You put a smoke machine on a tap. If you don't have one, pay a mechanic. And the smoke goes in the tap system on the evap, and where it's got a gross leak, you'll see smoke coming out, and that'll be it. And I'll bet you dollars to donuts, it's one of those things you bought, like the evap canister or the evap purge valve. I bet you got from the junkyard. They're no good, too. They're so old. But put a smoke machine on it. The smoke will come out wherever it's leaked because you got a gross leak. When they're little leaks, it'll still find it, but it can be very hard. But a gross leak has got to be pretty big, and the smoke will come billowing out, and you can figure out what it is. David S310 says, I get an odor when I accelerate heavy. I got an 01 Lexus LS430. When I push the gas all the way, it smells like rotten eggs. What could it be? All right. Well, your catalytic converter has been sulfated. Rotten eggs is sulfur smell, right? And you step on a gas and you smell rotten eggs. That means your catalytic converter has sulfur gas built up. You could try cleaning it with some of these catalytic converters. Sometimes you have to replace it. But there's one other thing that could be, and pray it's that, because that's a lot cheaper fix. Catalytic converters cost a fortune on those Lexuses. They got two big ones on those V8s. Pray it's your battery, because if you accelerate heavy, the alternator is putting out a lot of power. It could be your battery's going bad, and they also will sulfate. So what you want to do, you smell it, pull over to the side of the road, open the hood fast, smell the battery. If the battery stinks of sulfur, you just need another battery, because they got sulfuric acid in them. Pray it's that, but more often, since you say you're accelerating heavy, it's probably coming out of the back tailpipe. And if that's the case, try cleaning a catalytic converter, but they might need replacing. Also, I would buy my gas somewhere else. It means the gasoline you're buying has too much sulfur. They're not supposed to have sulfur in it. There's a lot of sulfur in some oils that they get out of the ground, and cheaper companies don't make the gasoline right out of the oil, and they contain too much sulfur, and then it stinks as it burns. And it will clog up your catalytic converter and ruin them. And like I said, it costs a fortune on one of those V8 Lexuses. 007 says, what's a moose test? Can you tell us what makes a car pass a moose test? And do all-wheel drive cars perform better in this test? Well, yeah, they do. And here's a picture to show you. Kind of looks like a moose, I guess they call it. It's to get around a moose, right? They put cones up. And you got to be driving at least 45 miles an hour getting into the curve with two belted passengers to see what happens. Does it flip over? Does it lose control? All-wheel drive vehicles can make maneuvers better because all four wheels are driving. And with modern all-wheel drive systems, I mean, some of them are so complex that they can do limited slip on one versus the other. They can turn power off to one that's slipping, give more power to the other one with traction. I mean, they're really complex stuff. It's insane technology. Now, fixing it is insane, too, when it breaks. But when it's working, it's insane technology. The whole thing started, I guess, Sweden or someplace. You got to avoid a moose on the road, right? Big old moose, you got to go around. And since it's 45 miles an hour at minimum starting speed, that's reasonably fast for doing a mover like that without your car flipping over. So it is a valid test. And you will do better in most all-wheel drive systems because they have all four wheels driving. You got more control when you're making a fast turn. And those all-wheel drive systems are all computer-driven, so they can react in microseconds where human beings can't. Vic, a Utah rider says, my coil melted. I got 2003 Highlander. The plug came out, the coil melted. How did this happen? Somebody did not put the spark plug in tight enough. If you're really worried, if you change the spark plugs, buy yourself a torque wrench. You tighten until the torque wrench goes click, and then you know the spark plug is perfectly tightened in. In your case, it wasn't tightened in. So when they're not tightened in, big explosions inside your engine. That pushes on the spark plug, and eventually it starts on-threading itself. Well, what happened in your case was, as it on-threaded, then the hot exhaust gases started to come up, and that melted your coil. Unless you got a hole in the side of your engine where the hot gases come from, it's just because the plug got loose, destroyed the coil. Replace the coil, and when you put the new spark plug in, torque it down correctly, and it won't happen again. And here's something I got to warn people about. A lot of people are thinking old school. Think, I'm going to put some lubricant on my spark plug. There's some anti-seize lubricant. No, do not do that. Modern spark plugs are made not to be lubricated. They already have a coating built into the electroplating process. Don't put anything on them. Swell says, my radio keeps shorting out. I got an '07 Pontiac. The radio stopped working. I tested the wires had power, so I figured the unit was done and put the original one back in. Tonight I put another unit in, and it works with the engine not running, but when the key goes on and you start it, the interface shorted out and it won't work again. Hell, the wiring going to the radio is screwed up. When you turn the key on, it works, but when you start the car, it doesn't. Different circuits are involved, right? Do the simplest fix. Rather than tear the dash apart on that old Pontiac, it's 17 years old, you're going to have a mess. Plastic stuff's going to break. Probably your HVAC system will start going wrong because the little vent doors will get broken because they're plastic, tearing all that crap apart. So, just do this. Cut the power wires off the radio and run a new ground from the radio to the body for ground. Then go to the battery, run a nice, maybe 14, 16 gauge wire from the battery to your radio, put in an inline fuse to save it, right, and have it run that way. Then just remember to turn your radio off when you shut the car off so you don't drain the battery by having the radio on. Bypass all the wiring. Rather than try to figure out what the heck's wrong with the wiring, just bypass the stupid crap. That's the easiest way. Anytime you got a problem with something like a radio and it's in the wiring, why tear the whole dash apart? Just cut the power wire, run a new one to the battery with a fuse, and if you're one of those guys that worries about it, maybe put a toggle switch on it so you can remember, turn the toggle switch off so there's no power. But if you remember to shut the radio off, it's It's pretty easy to do. And I mean, push comes to shove. If you do leave the radio out and it drains your battery, big deal. You jump start it, charge the battery, and away you go. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.